Moderator for this panel is Lisa Graves. And Lisa Graves is the executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy, the publisher of prwatch.org, sourcewatch.org, banksterusa.org, and perhaps most famously, the woman who brought us alecexposed.org. Ms. Graves has served in senior positions in all three branches of the federal government. She is a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Policy and Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Justice. She served as Chief Counsel for Nominations in the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee for the Chairman and the Ranking Member. And she was Deputy Chief of the Article II Judges Division of the U.S. Courts, including oversight of the Financial Disclosure Office for Judicial Ethics. She was also the Senior Legislative Strategist for the American Civil Liberties Union on National Security and Surveillance Policies and Deputy Director of the Center for National Security Studies. She and PR Watch have been extremely generous in supporting this conference. We are very fortunate to have Lisa Graves serve as the moderator for this panel. Thank you so much.
Well, I just want to welcome you this rainy day in Southern California. I'm reminded of a song. You know the song. It never rains in Southern California, and it, in some ways, is a bit of a parallel to this notion that it will never have a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, or will never be able to overturn Citizens United. And I have news for the world. It's raining in Southern California, which it does actually from time to time. And I do believe we're going to overturn Citizens United, which we have done in our history. Many times, in fact, 27 times, and I think eventually 28 times. And so I'm especially honored to be the moderator of this panel, and I have the prerogative as the moderator to give some opening remarks. And so let me just thank Mary Beth and Anjali, who've been tremendous, and the whole team out here organizing this effort, and Greg Nojheim Greg Colvin for organizing this panel, for reaching out to these amazing intellects to help organize a discussion of some of the very complex issues involved in this issue of corporate rights, but not just for-profit corporate rights, non-profit corporate rights or privileges, as well as this complex set of issues that we see unfolding in between the rhetoric in some ways and the reality of what's been happening in the campaigns, at least in these first 3 years since Citizens United. So let me just back up a second, because you are going to hear from me and Marge Baker later today about some of the amendments that are going on, and we do have a very lengthy document for you that's out front that has the amendments, but you don't have to read them today. There won't be a test. But there is actually a very robust debate and discussion going on. And I have to say that I found Professor Lessig's presentation to be very inspiring, very illuminating on a lot of points. At the same time, I would say to you, in fairness, that we don't share all the same conclusions about what those insights would lead to. But that's fine, because we're at the beginning of a very big conversation in our nation about how to solve these very, very enormous problems, about corporate influence on our democracy, but beyond corporate influence and control and manipulation of our democracy, the influence of some of the richest people in our country and in our world on our democracy. And so I think that there are a lot of wonderful things that have been discussed. There's a conversation about the importance of having small donations and restoring the power of people to really have much more say in giving to candidates. And I think that's a very important effort. And at the same time, I would tell you from my research standpoint for the Center for Media and Democracy, where we published a lot of this work on prwatch.org, what we saw was in the presidential race, as you know, one candidate who raised a lot more money from fewer people, and a candidate who raised a similar amount of money from more people, on the small donation front versus the bigger donation front. But in some ways, that issue, as important as it is, does not illuminate a larger issue that we've observed, which is that the candidates were absolutely outspent by outside groups. This election was the most expensive election in US history. It was the most expensive election in the history of the world, And more dark money, not money that went to the candidates that you could see Sheldon Adelson giving big, million-dollar checks, not just the big money that went into super PACs, which was disclosed, although there is some cloaking of that, as Professor Levinson said, in terms of what goes into the super PAC fund, but money to nonprofit organizations that are organized under the Internal Revenue Code, known as 501c3s and C4s and C5s and C6s, which I won't get into. I had 12 minutes. Oh. Yes. Sorry about that. Okay, well, so the light just went on, but so in essence, what we've seen is an explosion of dark money, and in fact, the candidates know that there's an explosion of dark money. You could see that in the candidates' super PACs that were independent of the candidates, which were led by, in many cases, their treasurer, their campaign strategist, and their lawyer in their previous campaign, then went over to the super PAC to raise unlimited funds from unlimited sources to spend in an unlimited way. But that wasn't enough, because the outside groups, Karl Rove's Crossroads operation, he had a part that was a super PAC and a part that was not a super PAC, that was a nonprofit group in which you have no idea who those donors are. We saw that. We saw in this election the beginnings of some of the tail of that corruption. And it is about corruption. Professor Lissig's precisely right. This is a conversation about corruption. That conversation about corruption is nonpartisan. It's, in essence, transpartisan, cross-partisan. But the corruption that we've seen so far has not been transpartisan. The most glaring examples have been partisan. You have a group in Montana promoting to their donors in PowerPoint presentations that you can give unlimited money to them, and the best benefit is it's secret and you can watch the results come in on election day and no one will ever know that you influenced that election. That's what the PowerPoint presentation said for the Western Tradition group, the American Tradition group. You saw here in California, when the California Elections Board got involved in looking at who was funding one of the anti-proposition efforts, it turned out to be a shell group. One group that was getting funding from another shell group that in essence was getting funding from probably another shell group. We, in my little world at the Center for Media Democracy, we call that big secret bucks. We call that dark money, and that we've got to uncloak that dark money. And we're actually calling for an investigation of the Koch brothers and of anyone else who's giving dark money, because even though, as the other professors have said, this is not necessarily illegal, although I think that there was some illegal activity in this campaign, in this election overall, Congress has the power to investigate things not just because they're illegal or not legal, but because they have jurisdiction to enforce our laws and to investigate what's going on. And in fact, in 1996, after the 1996 election, Congress did investigate the machinations in that 1996 race and began an investigation of the Koch brothers' early operations, but the subpoenas to the Kochs were quashed. But I don't want to get into that in too much detail because I want to go back another step, which is to say the question of transparency is very vital. The work to get knowledge about who these corporations are, or who the individuals are who are donating to different groups that are very active in campaigns, whether they're using the magic words, as Jessica Levin said, or not, whether they're saying vote for or against or not, that's big. But the fact is, we have a lot of that data, but we can't run $1 million worth of ads after their ads saying don't listen to that ad because that is funded by Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, which is really this Texas billionaire, because of the way the system is structured. And so I guess what I would submit to you is that there's a lot of complicated issues about how to deal with corporate rights, whether they're described as constitutional, whether they're statutory. There's a lot of complicated issues about how to deal with the rights of small donors versus big donors. There are a lot of very important questions, and this panel is going to, I hope, illuminate some of those. As someone who has tracked some of these front groups, Citizens for a Strong America, Americans for Job Security, Americans for this, Americans for that. You know, it's a pop-up, it's a whole pop-up operation. It's a cottage industry. You can get disclosure of the group that gave to the group, but you're not getting much illumination. And so we have a lot of work to do. And there are profoundly powerful things that are happening. As has been mentioned, there's 2 states passed resolutions directing that their members of Congress basically moved to overturn Citizens United. 11 states overall have embraced this. I'm not going to go through all the math because I think Derek is going to talk about some of that at some point. But we've got hundreds of resolutions, and those resolutions are powerful because they're the beginning of this movement. And there are groups that are not in this room on these panels who are part of that conversation. Move to Amend, People for the American Way, Public Citizen, Common Cause, Communications Workers of America, some of the unions. So there's a very big, powerful, amazing conversation that, as Professor Lissig said, this gift of Citizens United has helped unveil and helped provoke. But I prefer to think of this circumstance as a little bit like making soup. You can't have a one flavor soup or, you know, it's pretty bland. You actually have to have a lot of different flavors. A lot of flavors come together to make this soup. Or maybe the better analogy is jazz. You have a lot of different experts. Maybe you've got progressive groups that are doing this and Republican groups that are doing that and some transpartisan groups that are doing this or that. And overall, what you're hoping to build is a movement for change that gets to a tipping point that enables a lot of things, that makes a lot of more things possible. And because the devil is in the details, I'm very pleased to present to you the panel today, who's going to get into some of those details about these very naughty, not naughty, issues about corporate constitutional rights and statutory rights and nonprofit rights or privileges. And so without further ado, I'd like to present to you Elizabeth Pullman from Loyola.